To the Ashfords, human value is measured by the zeros in a bank account. They saw me as a lowly secretary, a mere ornament at their stiff dinners. But they forgot one rule: the person holding the back door key owns the building. When I invited them, they laughed, unaware their empire was already crumbling. Tonight, on New York's brightest stage, I am not just accepting an award, I am here to collect a debt. My name is Ivy Thistledown, and at 32 years old, I had mastered the art of becoming invisible while standing in the center of a room. The morning sun was just beginning to slice through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ashford estate, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the Italian marble countertops. It was a kitchen designed for a magazine spread, not for cooking, cold and pristine, much like the family that owned it. I stood by the espresso machine, the one that cost more than my first car, carefully steaming milk. The hiss of the steam wand was the only sound in the cavernous room until the sharp, rhythmic clicking of heels announced the arrival of my mother-in-law. Beatrice Ashford did not walk. She patrolled. She swept into the kitchen wrapped in a silk dressing gown that probably cost $3,000. Her face already composed into a mask of haughty dissatisfaction. She sat at the head of the island, tapping a manicured fingernail against the granite. I placed the cup in front of her, the foam art perfectly symmetrical. She took a sip, her lips pursing slightly, eyes scanning me over the rim of the cup. She set the saucer down with a deliberate clatter. "Surprisingly adequate, Ivy," she said, her voice dripping with that peculiar tone of sweetness she reserved for insults. "It has a certain robust, rustic quality. It tastes exactly like the coffee at that little roadside diner Arthur's father used to stop at when he wanted to feel like a common man. Charming. Really." I kept my face neutral, a skill I had honed over 5 years of marriage. It was a masterful slight, in one breath. She had acknowledged the effort and categorized it as cheap, low class, and beneath her station. "I am glad you like it, Beatrice," I replied softly, turning back to the stove. "It is good that you have domestic talents," she continued, picking up a financial newspaper and not reading it. "Since Arthur tells me you are still struggling with that little typing job of yours, administrative assistant, it must be so tedious, filing papers all day." "It pays the bills," I said, cracking an egg into the pan. "Hardly," she scoffed. "It pays for your lipstick. Perhaps Arthur carries the weight of this house. You should be more grateful he allows you to play at having a career. A wife's place is supporting her husband's legacy, not fetching coffee for middle managers." The irony was so thick it nearly choked me. I plated the eggs just as Arthur walked in. My husband. The supposed pillar of the Ashford empire. He looked tired, his eyes puffy, the stress of maintaining a facade of wealth etching premature lines into his forehead. He kissed Beatrice on the cheek and gave me a vague, distracted nod. "Mother is right, Ivy," Arthur muttered as he sat down, loosening his tie as if it were a noose. "I do not know why you insist on working at that place. It is embarrassing when people ask what my wife does, and I have to say she answers phones. Just stay home. We have standards to uphold." I placed his breakfast before him. "I enjoy the work, Arthur, and the company is stable." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Stable Ethelgard Systems. It is a sterile lab. Real power is in real estate, in land. That is what the Ashfords do. We build empires." He was parroting his father, unaware that the Ashford empire was currently built on quicksand. I knew their financials better than they did. I knew about the 3 mortgages on the summer house. I knew about the maxed-out credit lines. I knew that Arthur had been rejected for a loan extension 2 days ago, but I said nothing. "Don't take it to heart," Arthur added, seeing my silence as submission. "Just try to look a little more presentable tonight. Clara is coming over later, and you know how she gets about appearances." I looked down at my outfit. A simple gray pencil skirt and a white blouse, efficient, professional, invisible. "I will try," I said. I left the house 20 minutes later. I drove my sensible, mid-range sedan out of the wrought iron gates, watching the Ashford Manor shrink in the rearview mirror. It was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. I drove for 6 blocks, turned a corner, and parked in a private garage beneath a nondescript office building. There, the transformation began. I left the sedan and walked toward the waiting black SUV with tinted windows. The driver, a man named Sterling, who had been with me since the beginning, opened the door without a word. I slid into the leather interior. The air conditioning set to exactly 68 degrees. I opened my briefcase, swapped my simple glasses for contacts, and pulled out a tablet. "Good morning, Mrs. Thistledown," Sterling said, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. He never used the name Ashford. "Good morning, Sterling. Take me to the tower." The drive to the financial district took 40 minutes. As we approached the Ethelgard Systems headquarters, a gleaming spire of glass and steel that pierced the skyline, I felt the suffocating weight of the Ashford kitchen lift off my shoulders. This was my domain. We bypassed the main entrance. The car slid into a secure underground bay. I stepped out, my posture shifting, the submissive curve of my spine straightened, my chin lifted. I walked to the private elevator, the one that required a retinal scan and a voice print. "Ivy Thistledown," I said. "Identity confirmed," the automated system replied. "Welcome back, Chief Operating Officer." The door slid open, and I ascended to the 90th floor. When I stepped out, the atmosphere was electric. This was the nerve center of Ethelgard Systems, a biotechnology and logistics conglomerate valued at over $400 billion. Heads did not just turn, they bowed. "Good morning, Ms. Thistledown," a junior analyst stammered, pressing his back against the wall to give me space. "Good morning," I replied, my voice carrying the steel edge I hid at home. "Have the reports on the merger with the Nordic Group on my desk in 10 minutes. "Yes, ma'am. Immediately." I walked into my office, a space larger than the entire ground floor of Arthur's house. The view of the city was panoramic. From here, everyone looked like ants. This was the truth of my life. I was not a secretary. I was the silent hand guiding billion-dollar acquisitions. I was the architect of corporate takeovers that made Wall Street tremble. I kept this secret for 2 reasons. First, the founder of Ethelgard, a brilliant but paranoid man who had mentored me, had made anonymity a condition of his trust. He believed that fame was a poison that clouded judgment, even after his death. I honored the pact, operating from the shadows while a figurehead CEO handled the press. Second, and perhaps more pathetically, was Arthur. When we met 5 years ago, I was already wealthy, though not yet at this height of power. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my portfolio. I wanted to see if a man from a prestigious family could value a woman he thought had nothing. I have my answer now. He did not. My executive assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, was waiting. "The board is anxious about the acquisition of the logistics chain in Asia. They want your final sign-off. Tell them to wait," I said, sitting behind my desk and unlocking my encrypted terminal. "I am reviewing the liability clauses, and Sarah get me the latest credit report on Ashford Holdings." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. She knew not to ask questions. "Of course, and there is a personal matter. Your sister-in-law is in the lobby downstairs. She insisted on seeing you. She thinks you work in the secretarial pool on floor 4. I sighed. "Clara, let her wait. I have a meeting. I will go down to the cafeteria level in an hour. We can maintain the charade a little longer." An hour later, I stripped off my blazer, rolled up my sleeves to look harried, and took the service elevator down to the 4th floor, then walked to the public lobby. Clara was standing there, looking like a peacock in a neon pink designer suit that screamed for attention. "Finally," Clara snapped as I approached. She looked me up and down with a sneer. "God, Ivy, look at you. That blouse is tragic. Is that from the clearance rack of a department store? It looks like something a librarian would wear to a funeral." "Hello, Clara," I said, keeping my voice small. "I am on my break. I do not have much time. Always so busy doing nothing. She rolled her eyes. Look, I need you to talk to Arthur. I stopped by the house, but he had already left. I need a small loan. Just $10,000. 10,000, I repeated. Clara, Arthur told me things are tight right now. Tight for you, maybe, she sniffed. Not for us. It is just a liquidity issue. My assets are tied up in investments. I found this incredible vintage handbag collection at an auction, and I need the cash by noon. Tell Arthur to transfer it. He listens to you when you whine enough. We do not have $10,000 to spend on handbags. Clara, I said, trying to inject some reality into her delusion. Clara stepped closer, her perfume overpowering. Do not say we, Ivy. It is Arthur's money. You are just the help he sleeps with. Honestly, I do not know why he married a woman with the ambition of a sloth. If you had any drive, you would get a real job. Maybe contribute something to the family instead of dragging us down with your mediocrity. She poked a finger at my chest. Just tell him, or I will tell Mother you were rude to me. You know how much she hates that? She turned and marched out, the automatic doors parting for her. I watched her go. She had no idea that the building she was standing in, the security guards she ignored, and the very ground beneath her feet were under my command. She was borrowing money from a brother who was secretly borrowing from loan sharks to buy bags she didn't need, while insulting the only person who could save them. I went back up to the 90th floor. The transition was harder this time. The anger was simmering, hot and dangerous in my chest. I sat at my desk, staring at the city. My computer pinged with a high-priority notification. It was from the Global Economic Summit Committee. I opened the email. Subject confidential. Leader of the Year Award selection. Dear Mrs. Thistledown, it is our distinct honor to inform you that the committee has unanimously voted to name you the Global Business Leader of the Year for your unprecedented work in stabilizing the international supply chain and your strategic vision at Ethelgard Systems. The award ceremony will be held this Saturday at the Plaza Hotel. I stared at the screen. This was the highest honor in the business world. Usually, it went to public figures, tech moguls who loved the camera. For them to choose me, the ghost in the machine, meant my work had become too loud to ignore. My finger hovered over the reply button. Accepting this meant stepping into the light. It meant ending the charade. It meant Arthur would know. Beatrice would know. Clara would know. I thought about the diner coffee comment. I thought about Arthur telling me I was embarrassed. I thought about Clara's sneer at my clearance rack clothes while begging for money she would never repay. They wanted a lowly secretary. They wanted someone to look down on, to make themselves feel tall among the ruins of their own failures. I was done making myself small so they could feel big. I hit reply. I accept. I picked up the internal phone line. Sarah, I said, my voice steady and cold. Get me the events coordinator. And Sarah, prepare a dossier on the Ashford family debt. Every cent, every mortgage, every dirty little secret they have buried. I want it all on my desk by tonight. Yes, ma'am, Sarah said. Is there a problem? No, I replied, looking at the reflection of the woman in the glass, powerful, wealthy, and finished with mercy. No problem at all. It is just time for a family reunion. The mask was not just slipping. I was tearing it off, and underneath, there was no longer the submissive wife they expected. There was only the CEO, and business was about to get very personal. The notification on my phone screen seemed innocent enough. It was just a digital invitation, a carefully curated image of gold leaf typography on a midnight blue background. Sent to the group chat titled Ashford Family Circle. I sat in the back of my chauffeured SUV, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows, and hesitated for a fraction of a second before pressing send. I have been invited to receive an award at the Global Economic Summit Gala this Saturday at the Plaza Hotel. It would mean a great deal to me if you all could attend. I placed the phone face down on the leather seat and waited. The reaction time of the Ashford family was always directly proportional to the potential for drama or financial gain. Since they likely saw neither in my little announcement, I expected a delay. I was wrong. The phone buzzed almost immediately. Clara was the first. Of course she was. My sister-in-law lived her life attached to her device, scrolling through social media feeds of people she hated, desperate to project an image of a life she could not afford. Her response was not text. It was a single emoji, the one rolling on the floor laughing. My stomach tightened, not with pain, but with the cold. Hard confirmation of what I already knew. Then came the private message from Arthur, my husband, the man who had sworn to honor and cherish me. Ivy, honey, please delete that before Mother sees it. We have a reputation to maintain. I know you are proud of your Employee of the Month thing, or whatever it is, but the plaza is for serious events. Do not make everyone uncomfortable by trying to drag us to a staff party. I stared at the words, staff party. He thought the Global Economic Summit, an event attended by heads of state and Fortune 500 CEOs, was a staff party. The ignorance was breathtaking. Then, the final nail in the coffin arrived. A voice note from Beatrice. I picked up the phone and held it to my ear. Watching the New York skyline shift from the chaotic grid of Midtown to the towering financial district, Ivy, Beatrice's voice was smooth, cultured, and laced with arsenic. That is very sweet, truly. But you must understand that the Ashfords have obligations. We are meeting with very important potential partners from Dubai that evening. We cannot possibly clear our schedule to watch you receive a certificate for what it was fast typing. Enjoy your little night out with your secretary friends. Make sure you take a taxi home. Arthur will be busy with the business. Fast typing. I did not cry. I did not feel the sting of rejection. Instead, I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. It was the feeling of a judge signing a warrant. I took a screenshot of the conversation. Then I took another screenshot of Arthur's private message. I saved them to a folder on my cloud drive named simply Evidence. Sterling, I said to my driver, my voice steady. ETA. 2 minutes to the Underground Bay. Mrs. Thistledown, he replied. Good. Call the legal department. Tell them I want the acquisition papers for the Ashford debt portfolio ready for signature by the time I step out of the elevator. When I walked into my office on the 90th floor, the atmosphere was different from the morning. The morning had been about maintenance. The afternoon was about hunting. Sarah was waiting by my desk, holding a thick leather-bound folder. She looked nervous. Mrs. Thistledown, are you sure about this? She asked, handing me the file. Buying distressed debt from a failing real estate firm is usually beneath our risk threshold. The Ashford assets are toxic. They are leveraged at nearly 90%. I opened the folder. The numbers were written in red. A hemorrhage of bad decisions and vanity projects. Beatrice had taken out loans to renovate a vacation home they had not visited in 3 years. Arthur had financed a luxury car fleet for the company that generated zero revenue. They were drowning, and they were using cups of water to bail out the Titanic. It is not an investment, Sarah, I said, uncapping my fountain pen. The nib was gold, sharp as a needle. It is an acquisition of leverage. Purchase the debt, all of it. Use the shell company so my name does not appear on the transfer documents yet. I want to own every brick of their house, every cushion on their sofas, and every tire on their leased cars by close of business today. Authorized amount, Sarah asked, her fingers hovering over her tablet. $12,400,000, I said, reading the total outstanding liability. Pay them face value. Let the banks think they got lucky. By tomorrow morning, the Ashfords will answer to Ethelgard Systems. I signed the document with a flourish. The ink was black and permanent. The afternoon board meeting was a bloodbath. Though not for me. The director of marketing had proposed a soft rebrand that would have cost the company $40 million with a projected return of less than 5%. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, listening to him drone on about synergy and brand warmth. When he finished, silence filled the room. The board members looked at me. That, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet like a scalpel. Was the most expensive waste of 20 minutes I have ever experienced. You are proposing we soften our image at a time when we are aggressively acquiring logistics chains in hostile markets. We are not selling teddy bears. Gentlemen, we are selling infrastructure. But, Mrs. Thistledown, the director stammered, sweating. The focus group suggest. I do not care what a focus group of 12 people in a shopping mall thinks, I interrupted. Standing up, I care about the shareholders. Kill the project. Reallocate the budget to R&D. And if you bring me a proposal this week again, bring your resignation letter with it. I walked out of the room. My heart rate hadn't even spiked. This was who I was. This was the woman Arthur called just a secretary. The dissonance between my two lives was becoming impossible to sustain. I left the office late, the sun had set, and the city was a grid of electric gold. I drove my sedan back to the suburbs, parking the Rolls-Royce Phantom back in its hidden garage. As I switched cars, I switched personas. I slumped my shoulders. I took off my diamond stud earrings and put on simple pearl ones. I prepared myself to be ignored. When I entered the Ashford house, the air was thick with tension. It wasn't the usual cold silence. It was the frantic energy of panic. Arthur was in the living room, pacing back and forth, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. He was shouting into his phone. I don't care what the system says. Check it again. The transfer went through this morning. He slammed the phone down on the coffee table as I walked in. He looked up, his eyes wild, his face flushed with alcohol and stress. You're late, he snapped. No hello? No, how was your day? I had to work overtime, I said quietly, placing my bag on the side table. Is everything all right? No, everything is not all right. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. The bank is freezing transfers. I needed to move capital to Mother's account for the venue deposit for next month's charity ball. And the funds are stuck. I frowned. I managed the household budget. I knew exactly how much was in our joint savings account. It was money I had put there from my secretary salary, supplemented by small, untraceable injections from my real accounts to keep us comfortable without raising suspicion. There should have been $50,000 in there. It was our emergency fund. It was the money for the roof repair we needed. I pulled out my phone and checked the banking app. Balance $0.42. I looked up at him. The coldness inside me spread, freezing my veins. Arthur, I said, my voice dangerously low. Where is the $50,000 from our joint account? He waved his hand dismissively, taking a large gulp of whiskey. I told you, I moved it to Mother's account. It is just a temporary loan. She needs to show liquidity for a deal she is closing. I will put it back next week. You emptied our savings. I took a step forward. Without asking me. That money was for the house repairs. It was my savings too. Arthur? Oh, stop being so dramatic. Ivy? He slammed the glass down, liquid sloshing onto the polished wood table. It is $50,000. In the grand scheme of Ashford business, that is pocket change. You act like I gambled it away. I invested it in the family. The family that laughs at me, I asked. The family that thinks I am a joke. You took my money to give to your mother so she can pretend to be rich for another week. Arthur's face twisted in anger. He crossed the room and loomed over me, trying to use his height to intimidate. It was a tactic that might have worked on a timid secretary. It did not work on the CEO of Eithilgard Systems. I stood my ground, my chin raised, meeting his gaze with an intensity that made him blink. Listen to me, Ivy, he sneered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and cheap desperation. You do not understand how this world works. You file papers. You answer phones. You fetch coffee. That is your world. My world is about leverage, about appearance, about making moves that people like you cannot even comprehend. I did what I had to do as the man of this house. I will not answer you. You stole from me, I stated. It was not a question. I reallocated funds, he shouted. And frankly, I am sick of your constant nagging about pennies. If you were more supportive, if you were a real asset to this family like Clara, you would understand. But you are not. You are just a lowly secretary. Ivy. You will never understand the pressure of carrying a legacy. The words hung in the air. Just a lowly secretary. It was the phrase I had been waiting for. It was the key that unlocked the final door. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fraying cuffs of his shirt. I saw the fear behind his eyes that he tried to mask with arrogance. I saw a man who was drowning and had just punched a hole in the only life raft he had. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg him to put the money back. Instead, I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile I wore when I orchestrated the hostile takeover of a rival logistics firm in Berlin. It was a smile that stripped the flesh from the bone. It was sharp, predatory, and devoid of any warmth. Arthur saw it, and for a moment, the bluster fell away from his face. He took a half-step back, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. He looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger standing in his wife's clothes. A shiver seemed to run through him, though the room was warm. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he whispered, his voice losing its edge. I walked past him toward the stairs. I paused at the bottom step and turned back. My silhouette was framed by the dim light of the hallway. "You are right, Arthur," I said, my voice soft but carrying a resonance that filled the room. "I do not understand your business. I have been playing small, thinking it would help you feel big, but you have made it very clear where I stand." "Where are you going?" he asked, sounding suddenly like a lost child. "To pick out a dress," I replied, "for Saturday." "I told you we are not going to your little party," he yelled, trying to regain control. "I know," I said. "You have your important meeting with the partners from Dubai, and I have my award." I gripped the banister. "Get some sleep, Arthur. You are going to need your strength, because you are right about one thing. Business is brutal." I leaned in slightly, my eyes locking onto his. "Be ready. This Saturday, you will finally understand exactly what business is." I turned and ascended the stairs, leaving him standing alone in the silent, mortgaged living room, clutching an empty glass, unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already been sold. And the landlord was coming to collect. The trap was not set with steel bars or tripwires. It was set with hope. In the world of business, there is no bait more intoxicating than the promise of salvation to a drowning man, and the Ashford family was currently gasping for air. I orchestrated the leak at 9 in the morning. I instructed my vice president of strategy to have a casual lunch with a real estate broker who I knew gossiped like a town crier at the country club Beatrice frequented. The planted information was simple but devastatingly attractive. Ethelgard Systems was looking to expand its North American headquarters and was seeking a local partner with heritage and prestige to facilitate a massive land acquisition. By 2 in the afternoon, the bait had been swallowed whole. I was in the library, dusting books that nobody in this house had read in a decade. When Beatrice stormed in, she did not look like a woman on the brink of bankruptcy. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide and manic. Clara and Arthur followed close behind her, vibrating with the same frantic energy. "It is a miracle," Beatrice declared, throwing her hands up toward the ceiling. "I told you all. I told you that the Ashford name still carries weight in this city. We are saved." "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice mild, the feather duster poised over a leather-bound encyclopedia. "Ethelgard Systems," Arthur said, practically breathless. "The tech giant. They are looking for a partner, and not just any partner. They want a legacy family. Rumor has it, they are looking to spend upwards of $500 million on a new campus." I blinked, feigning confusion. "Ethelgard. That sounds familiar. Is that not related to the company I work for?" Clara let out a sharp, derisive laugh. She flopped onto the velvet sofa, kicking off her heels. "Oh, Ivy, please, you work for A.S. Logistics. That is some tiny, dusty subsidiary that handles shipping crates. Ethelgard Systems is the parent company, It is like comparing a frantic ant to the queen. Do not try to attach your little filing job to this gold mine. I lowered my head to hide the smirk that threatened to break through. I had spent years carefully cultivating this misunderstanding. I had always referred to my workplace by its acronym or its division name, letting their own lack of curiosity do the rest. To them, I was a cog in a machine I actually designed. I see, I said softly. So, you think you can work with them? Think, Beatrice scoffed. We are the only logical choice. Who else has the connections? The history. We just need an introduction. We need to get in a room with their CEO, as if on cue. The doorbell rang. It was not the regular chime, but the heavy, authoritative knock of a private courier. I went to answer it, but Arthur pushed past me. I will get it. It might be the bank. He opened the door to reveal a uniformed messenger holding a large, cream-colored envelope sealed with gold wax. The Ethelgard crest, a stylized shield and spear, was stamped into the wax. Arthur's hands shook as he broke the seal. He pulled out a card made of heavy cardstock, the kind that cost $50 a sheet. My God, he whispered. Read it, Clara shrieked, jumping up from the sofa. Arthur cleared his throat, his voice trembling with reverence. The board of directors of Ethelgard Systems cordially invites the Ashford family to the Global Economic Summit Gala at the Plaza Hotel. You are invited as honorary guests of the corporation to celebrate a night of industry excellence. Silence descended on the room, followed immediately by an explosion of noise. Beatrice screamed a sound of pure, unadulterated greed. Clara hugged her mother. Arthur pumped his fist in the air. They know who we are, Beatrice cried out, clutching the invitation to her chest as if it were a holy relic. They must have done their research. They know we are the premier real estate family. They invited us specifically, honorary guests. Did you hear that? I stood in the doorway, the invisible servant, watching them celebrate their own execution. They had completely forgotten that 24 hours ago. I had invited them to the exact same event. They had forgotten that they had mocked my invitation. To them, this was entirely different. My invitation was a ticket to a staff party. This invitation was a summon to the throne room. They did not know that I had ordered Sarah to send this specific invitation via courier 45 minutes after the leak occurred. I wanted them to feel special. I wanted them to feel chosen. We have to get ready, Clara gasped, her eyes widening. It is this Saturday. That is only 2 days away. I have nothing to wear. Absolutely nothing. We need to look impeccable, Beatrice commanded, instantly switching into general mode. Arthur, release the funds. I do not care what hold the bank has. Override it. Use the emergency credit lines. If we land this deal, we can pay off the debt 10 times over. We need stylists. We need jewelry. We need to look like we are worth $500 million. The next 48 hours were a blur of narcissism and abuse. The house became a staging ground for their vanity. Racks of designer clothes were wheeled in and out. Stylists fussed over Beatrice's hair. Makeup artists debated shades of lipstick for Clara. And I was the backstage crew. Ivy, Clara yelled from her bedroom on Friday evening. Come here now. I walked up the stairs, my legs aching from running errands for them all day. I entered her room, which was strewn with discarded silk and chiffon. This dress is wrinkled, Clara snapped, pointing to a crimson gown thrown on the bed. The steamer the stylist brought is broken. Fix it, and be careful. If you burn it, you will be paying for it for the rest of your life. I am preparing dinner, Clara, I said calmly. Dinner can wait, she hissed. This is a multi-million-dollar opportunity. Do you want us to starve in the streets? Iron the dress, Ivy. Make yourself useful for once. I picked up the dress. It was beautiful. A Valentino creation that I happened to know cost $12,000. I knew this because I owned the department store chain where she had bought it on credit. I took the dress to the laundry room. As I stood there, surrounded by the hum of machines, pressing the hot iron against the delicate fabric, I felt a strange sense of dissociation. I was the powerful CEO who could crush this family with a single phone call. Yet here I was, sweating over an ironing board, removing creases from the fabric that would adorn my enemies, but I did it. I did it perfectly. I wanted them to look their best. I wanted them to shine. When a sacrifice is brought to the altar, it should be adorned in finery. On the morning of the gala, the house was at a fever pitch. Arthur was pacing the hallway in a tuxedo that he had leased for the evening. He looked handsome in a superficial way, the kind of handsome that rots from the inside out. I walked down the stairs. I was wearing my regular clothes, jeans, and a sweater. I had my own dress waiting for me, but it was not here. It was in the private suite at the plaza, guarded by my security team. Arthur stopped pacing when he saw me. He looked at his watch, then at me, his expression shifting to one of awkward condescension. "Ivy," he started, adjusting his cufflinks. "We need to talk about tonight. I am ready to go whenever you are," I lied. "I just need to change. I have a nice black dress from—" "No," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "That is just it. You are not going." I paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Excuse me, but I was invited. I invited you first. Remember? And then you got the corporate invitation." "Yes, but things have changed," Arthur said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when explaining simple concepts to me. "This is no longer just a social event or your little employee award night. This is a high-stakes business negotiation. We are going there to secure the future of this family." Beatrice swept into the hall, looking like a grand dame in emerald green velvet. "Arthur is right, Ivy," she said, checking her reflection in the hall mirror. "We cannot have any distractions. You are a sweet girl, in your own limited way, but you simply do not have the polish for this crowd. These are global titans. If you said something silly, or wore one of your bargain bin outfits, it could cost us the deal. We are doing this for you. Really," Arthur added, trying to sound benevolent. "I do not want you to feel out of place. It would be cruel to drag you along to a room where you do not belong. You would just be standing in the corner holding my purse." "But Arthur," I said, widening my eyes in a performance of naive worry. "I heard that the leadership at Ethelgard is extremely particular. They value loyalty and integrity. Are you sure you can handle them? What if the contract is too complex?" Clara laughed from the top of the stairs, descending in the crimson dress I had ironed. "Oh, bless her heart, she thinks she can give us business advice. Ivy, honey, just stay home and watch a movie, order a pizza, leave the complex thinking to the adults." Arthur stepped closer to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and suffocating. "Stay home, Ivy. Do not wait up. We will probably be out late celebrating the deal. Just keep the house tidy in case we bring guests back." "Okay," I whispered, looking down at the floor. "If you think that is best—" "It is," he said firmly. 10 minutes later, the rented limousine arrived. I stood by the window and watched them pile in. Beatrice was waving at the neighbors, ensuring everyone saw her departure. Arthur looked like a king surveying his kingdom, unaware that the castle walls had already been breached. As the taillights of the limousine disappeared around the bend of the driveway, the mask dropped from my face, the submissive, worried wife evaporated. I walked to the kitchen and picked up my secure phone. I dialed a number that bypassed all secretaries and went straight to the earpiece of the head of event security at the plaza. "This is Thistledown," I said. The voice on the other end answered immediately. "Go ahead, ma'am. We are ready for your arrival." "The Ashford party is en route," I said, my voice cool and precise. "They are arriving in a rented limousine, license plate number Tango Victor 692. We have them on the list. Ma'am, VIP entry." "No," I said. "They are holding invitations marked honorary guests. I want you to verify those invitations with extreme prejudice. Make them wait, make them sweat, and when you finally let them in, I want you to guide them to their assigned table." "Yes, ma'am." "And which table is that?" I looked around the empty kitchen, the silence of the house finally comforting rather than oppressive. "Table 42, I said. "The overflow table. the one next to the kitchen service doors, behind the large decorative pillar. I want them to hear the applause, but I do not want them to see the stage until I decide they can. Understood. Table 42, obstructed view. And one more thing, I added, a small, cold smile touching my lips. Ensure there is no champagne at their table. Give them tap water. If they ask for wine, tell them the server is busy. Consider it done. Mrs. Thistledown. I hung up the phone. The trap was not just set. The cage door had been welded shut. They were driving toward their salvation. Thinking they were the guests of honor, they had no idea they were the main course. I went upstairs to the master bedroom, the room Arthur had forbidden me from entering when he was working because genius needed silence. I opened his closet. I found the hidden safe behind the row of suits. I knew the combination. It was his birthday, 0812. I opened it. Inside were the papers I expected. The loan documents were forged with my signature. The secret credit cards. I took them all. I did not need them for the takeover that was already legally sealed, but I wanted them for the moment when I would look him in the eye and watch his soul crumble. I placed the documents in my bag. Then I walked out of the house, locking the front door behind me. I did not look back. At the end of the street, the black Rolls-Royce Phantom emerged from the shadows like a panther. Sterling opened the rear door before the car even came to a full stop. "To the plaza, Mrs. Thistledown?" he asked. "Yes, Sterling," I replied, sliding into the darkness of the car. "And drive fast. I do not want to be late for my own party." The engine purred, a sound of raw power, and we accelerated into the night. The Ashfords were ahead of me on the road, chasing a mirage. I was coming up behind them, bringing the storm. The red taillights of the rented limousine dissolved into the twilight, swallowing the Ashford family and their delusions of grandeur into the throat of the city. I stood by the bay window of the living room, the silence of the house finally settling around me. For 5 years, this silence had felt heavy, suffocating, filled with the unspoken judgments of a husband who saw me as a burden and a mother-in-law who saw me as a stain on her upholstery. But tonight, the silence was different. It was the deep, resonant intake of breath before a scream. I did not move for exactly 3 minutes. I checked my watch. The moment the digital hand marked the safe distance, I tapped a single command on my phone. Execute. The transformation of the Ashford estate from a mausoleum of fading aristocracy into a backstage dressing room for a queen happened with military precision. 2 matte black vans, unmarked and silent, screeched into the driveway, bypassing the intercom I had already disabled. The doors slid open, and a team of 12 individuals poured out. These were not the local salon staff Beatrice used, the ones who gossiped and overcharged. This was the elite, the kind of team that prepares Vogue cover models and royalty, people who signed non-disclosure agreements that carried penalties of $1 million for a single leaked whisper. They swept into the house with cases of equipment. There were no pleasantries. They knew the timeline. 1 hour. I stood in the center of the foyer and began to unbutton the cardigan I had worn to play the role of the dutiful, worried wife. I let it drop to the floor. Then the jeans. Then the simple cotton shirt. I kicked them aside, leaving a pile of Ivy the secretary on the expensive Persian rug. I stood there, stripped of the costume, breathing in the cool air. Mrs. Thistledown, the lead stylist, a man named Henri, who had styled the First Lady for the inauguration, nodded to me. "The dress is unpacked. The emeralds are secure. Shall we begin?" "Make me unrecognizable, Henri," I said. "I do not want them to see a trace of the woman who cooked their eggs." He smiled, a sharp, knowing expression. "Tonight, we are not creating a look. We are creating a weapon." I sat in the chair brought into the center of the living room. The lighting rig was set up in seconds. The process was less like a beauty routine and more like the assembly of a fighter jet. Layers of primer, foundation, and contour were applied to sculpt my face, highlighting the cheekbones that I usually kept hidden behind loose hair. My hair. typically tied in a sensible, messy bun, was blown out, oiled, and structured into cascading waves that gleamed like dark water as the brush swept across my eyelids, painting them with crushed gold and obsidian. My mind drifted back. It was a necessary regression, a way to anchor myself before the storm. I remembered the garage in Seattle. It was 12 years ago. I was 20 years old, eating instant noodles that cost 40 cents a pack, staring at a wall of code that would eventually become the backbone of Ethelgard's logistic algorithm. I remembered the fatigue, the days without sleep, the way my eyes burned from the blue light of the monitors. I remembered the first investor who told me I was too pretty to be a CEO and asked if I wanted to be his assistant instead. I remembered the day I sold the first iteration of the software for $10 million. I remembered the sudden influx of friends, the men who suddenly found my jokes funnier and my company more desirable. I saw how money acted as a lens, distorting the way people looked at me. They didn't see Ivy. They saw a bank vault. That was when I created the rules. No press, no photos, a proxy CEO for the public face. And for me, a simple life in the shadows, searching for something money couldn't buy: genuine connection. I thought Arthur was that connection. He was charming, seemingly vulnerable, a man who talked about art and history. I thought his family's old money meant they wouldn't care about my finances. I was wrong. Their money was a ghost, and they were starving vampires looking for fresh blood. I had hidden my light to be loved, only to find that without the light. They treated me like a shadow. "It is time for the dress." Henri's voice snapped me back to the present. The gown was a custom creation by a reclusive designer in Milan. It was not fabric. It was liquid architecture. It was a deep, shimmering gold, the color of molten bullion. The bodice was structured like armor, rigid and defining, while the skirt flowed like mercury. It was designed to catch every photon of light in a room and reflect it back with blinding intensity. I stepped into it. The silk lining was cool against my skin. The zipper hissed shut, locking me in. Then came the jewelry, the seraphim set, a necklace of yellow and white diamonds, centered by a 30-carat canary diamond drop. It was heavy. It felt like wearing a small house around my neck. The value of the stones resting on my clavicle was exactly $55 million more than the entire net worth of the Ashford family, even before they mortgaged their souls. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was not Ivy Ashford. She was not a secretary. She was a titan. She was terrifying. "Perfect," Henri whispered. I walked out of the front door. The vans were already packing up. My ride was waiting. It was not a limousine. It was the company's flagship transport, a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Extended wheelbase, armored to withstand high-velocity rounds and chemical attacks. It was painted a black so deep it seemed to absorb the night. Sterling stood by the door, his uniform crisp. He did not blink at my transformation. He simply bowed, lower than usual. "You look ready for war, Mrs. Thistledown," he said. "I am Sterling," I replied. "Let us go." I slid into the rear cabin, the door sealed with the heavy, reassuring thud of a bank vault closing. The interior smelled of rare leather and ozone. I picked up the tablet that was waiting for me. On the screen was the real-time financial autopsy of the Ashford family. I scrolled through the data as the car glided onto the highway. It was worse than I had thought. To fund their appearance tonight, the clothes, the stylist, the donation pledge they planned to make to impress the CEO, Arthur, had leveraged the last unencumbered asset they had, his grandmother's trust fund. He had forged the trustee's signature. I looked at the numbers. They had bet 100% of their remaining existence on this single night. They were convinced that by midnight, they would be partners with Ethelgard, and the signing bonus would wipe the slate clean. A pang of sadness hit me. It was a small, sharp ache in the center of my chest. This was the man I had slept beside for 5 years. This was the family I had cooked Thanksgiving dinner for. There was a tragedy in their desperation, a pathetic quality to their greed. For a second, I wondered if I was being too harsh, Could I just pay off their debts? Divorce. Arthur quietly, and leave them to their mediocrity. Was the public humiliation necessary? The tablet pinged, a high-priority message from the private investigator I had hired to shadow Arthur for the last month. Subject guest update, the plaza. Text target. Arthur Ashford has just arrived. He is accompanied by his mother and sister. He has also facilitated the entry of a fourth guest under the alias Cousin Bella. Identity confirmed, Isabella Rossi. 24 years old, former hostess at the Gilded Lily. Target Arthur purchased a diamond bracelet for her yesterday, using the overdraft from your joint account. Receipt attached. I opened the attachment. There it was, a receipt for $5,000. The exact amount needed to fix the leaking roof in the guest room. He had claimed we were broke. He had screamed at me for buying expensive organic milk. And yet, he had drained our emergency fund to drape diamonds on a mistress he was bringing to my award ceremony. The sadness in my chest vanished instantly. It was replaced by a coldness so absolute it felt like liquid nitrogen pumping through my veins. The hesitation evaporated. The wife died in that leather seat. The executioner was born. They had not just disrespected me, they had financed their betrayal with my own labor. They were bringing his mistress to watch me be humiliated, thinking I was just the secretary sitting at home. I tapped the intercom button connecting me to the driver. "Sterling," I said, my voice dropping an octave, devoid of any tremble. "Yes, ma'am." "Cancel the arrival at the VIP underground entrance." There was a pause. The VIP entrance was designed for security, to avoid the paparazzi, to keep the billionaires safe from the flashbulbs. "Ma'am?" Sterling asked. "The press pit is overflowing at the main entrance. It will be chaotic." "I know," I said, staring at the receipt on the screen, memorizing the date and the time. "Take me to the main entrance, right under the marquee. I want the cameras. I want the lights." I looked out the window at the glittering spires of Manhattan approaching. The Plaza Hotel stood like a lit castle in the distance. "I want them to see me," I whispered to the glass. "I want them to see exactly what they threw away." "Understood," Sterling replied. The car accelerated, the engine roaring a deep, guttural note of aggression. I sat back and adjusted the $55 million necklace. I checked my reflection in the dark window one last time. The eyes staring back were dry and hard as diamonds. The time for mercy had passed. It was time for the show. The Plaza Hotel did not just sit on the corner of Fifth Avenue, it presided over it like a monarch on a limestone throne. The exterior was bathed in floodlights that turned the stone facade into a glowing beacon of exclusivity, while the red carpet unfurled down the steps looked less like a walkway and more like an artery pumping the lifeblood of the global economy into the grand ballroom. I sat in the back of the armored Rolls-Royce, parked discreetly in a reserved lane a block away. My tablet was propped up on my knees, streaming a live, high-definition feed from the security cameras I had ordered my team to focus specifically on the arrival zone. I was not just attending a gala, I was directing a tragedy, and I refused to miss the opening act. "Target arriving," the security chief's voice crackled through the car's speaker system. "License plate confirmed. The rental limousine is approaching the drop-off point." I watched on the screen as the long white limousine, a model that was at least 8 years out of date, pulled up behind a sleek, matte gray Bugatti owned by a tech mogul from Silicon Valley. The contrast was immediate and painful. The Bugatti whispered power. The limo screamed desperate overcompensation. The driver of the limo, a man who looked bored and underpaid, hopped out to open the door. He didn't have the crisp, military precision of private security. He just looked like a guy doing a gig. First out was Clara. The crimson Valentino dress I had ironed with my own hands dragged slightly on the asphalt before she kicked it aside. She paused, waiting for the paparazzi to flash their bulbs. But the cameras were pointed elsewhere, focused on the heir to a French luxury goods fortune who was walking up the steps 20 feet away. Clara frowned, a glitch in her fantasy, before tossing her hair and striking a pose for no one. Then came Beatrice, wrapped in her emerald velvet, clutching a clutch bag that sparkled with what I knew were Swarovski crystals, not diamonds. She held her chin so high she looked like she was trying to smell the air on the second floor. Finally, Arthur emerged, helping a young woman out of the car. Bella, the mistress. Seeing her in high definition was a visceral shock. She was young, perhaps 24, with hair bleached a platinum blonde that looked harsh under the streetlights. She was wearing a silver dress that was cut too low and hemmed too high. The kind of garment that looked expensive in a nightclub, but looked cheap at a $1 trillion summit. On her wrist, the diamond bracelet Arthur had bought with our roof repair money glittered mockingly. Arthur offered his arm to both women, looking like a man trying to wrangle 3 distinct disasters at once. He adjusted his bow tie, his face a mask of nervous sweat and arrogant expectation. "Look at them," I whispered to the empty car. Walking into the lion's den with raw steaks in their pockets, they ascended the stairs. I switched the camera feed to the interior vestibule, the Checkpoint Charlie of New York high society. This was where the dream would encounter its first wall. A phalanx of security guards in black suits stood behind a velvet rope, armed with digital tablets and earpieces. These were not nightclub bouncers. They were gatekeepers for the global elite. The Ashford family approached the head of the line, bypassing a queue of other guests. "Excuse us," Clara announced, her voice picked up clearly by the ambient microphones. "Make way. We are the Ashford party." The guard, a man named Marcus, whom I had employed for 3 years, did not blink. He simply held up a hand, a wall of flesh and indifference. "Invitations, please," Marcus said, his tone flat. "We are with the corporation," Beatrice declared, puffing out her chest. "We are the guests of honor for Ethelgard Systems. We are expected at the CEO's table." Arthur produced the cream-colored envelopes with a flourish, slapping them into Marcus's hand as if he were tipping a bellboy. "Scan them, and be quick about it. We have a meeting with your boss." Marcus scanned the QR code on the first card. The small light on his tablet did not flash the soft, welcoming green of a VIP clearance. It flashed a harsh, abrasive yellow. "One moment," Marcus said, frowning at the screen. "There seems to be a misunderstanding regarding your status." "Misunderstanding," Clara snapped, stepping forward. "Do you know who we are? We are the premier real estate developers in this state. The CEO personally invited us." "According to this system," Marcus said, turning the tablet slightly so they could not see it, "you are holding general admission tickets, Section D." "General admission," Beatrice shrieked. The sound cut through the ambient chatter of the lobby. "That is impossible. We are honorary guests. Look at the seal on the envelope." "The envelope is decorative, ma'am," Marcus replied, his patience visibly thinning. "The digital code is the authority. Section D is the standing room and rear overflow seating. You do not have access to the VIP floor, the pre-show cocktail lounge, or the red carpet photo wall." "There must be a glitch," Arthur yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. "Call your supervisor. Call the CEO. Tell them Arthur Ashford is here." "Sir, if you lower your voice, I can direct you to your seats," Marcus said, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. "If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have to escort you off the premises. We have heads of state in the building. We have zero tolerance for outbursts." The threat hung in the air. The people in line behind them, a famous Hollywood director and his wife, were beginning to stare and whisper. "Arthur," Beatrice hissed, grabbing his arm. "People are looking. This is just a clerical error. Once we get inside and find the CEO, we will laugh about this. Do not make a scene now." Arthur swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Fine, show us to Section D. But rest assured, someone will be fired for this tomorrow." Marcus gestured to a side door, far away from the grand double doors where the other guests were entering. "Through there, down the corridor, past the service elevators." I watched them shuffle away, stripped of their dignity before they had even checked their coats. I tapped the screen, switching to the camera inside the grand ballroom. It was a cavernous space of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, filled with round tables draped in white linen and laden with floral arrangements that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. The camera tracked the Ashfords as they emerged from a side door usually used by the catering staff. They looked disoriented, blinking in the dim light. An usher, instructed precisely by my team, intercepted them. "Ashford party. Right this way." He led them past the center of the room. They walked past the tables where the captains of industry sat. They walked past the table where the mayor of New York was laughing with the founder of a major search engine. They kept walking. Arthur slowed down as they passed Table 1, the CEO's table. It was empty, reserved, glowing with a centerpiece of rare orchids. "That is where we should be," Arthur muttered to Bella. "Just wait. Once the presentation starts, they will call us up." "My feet hurt," Bella whined, her voice tinny on the audio feed. "You said we would be sitting with movie stars. Why are we walking toward the kitchen?" "Hush, Bella," Beatrice snapped. "It is a strategy. Sometimes the most important people sit in the back to observe. It is a power move." The usher stopped at the very edge of the room. Table 42. It was a small, wobbly table squeezed between a large decorative pillar and the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter burst out with a tray of food, a gust of hot, garlic-scented air would hit the table. It was in the shadows, partially blocked from viewing the main stage by the pillar. "Here you are," the usher said, pulling out chairs that were clearly different from the plush velvet seats at the other tables. These were simple banquet chairs. "This is a joke," Clara said, staring at the table settings. At the other tables, there were bottles of vintage champagne, crystal flutes, and personalized gift bags. At table 42, there was a pitcher of tap water with floating ice cubes and 4 glass tumblers. No wine, no gifts, just water. "Where is the champagne?" Bella asked, sitting down and pouting. "I need a drink." "I will flag down a waiter," Arthur said, trying to regain some masculine authority. He raised his hand as a server passed by with a tray of Bollinger. "Excuse me, garçon. We need a bottle over here." The waiter, a professional who had been briefed on the no-service list, did not even break stride. He breezed past Arthur as if he were a ghost. Arthur's hand remained in the air, grasping at nothing. He slowly lowered it, his face burning. "They are overwhelmed," Beatrice said, smoothing her dress nervously. "It is a big event. Ivy probably messed up the RSVP. I bet she put the wrong code in the system when she was pretending to help us." I laughed out loud in the silence of my Rolls Royce. Even now, even here, I was the villain in their narrative. "You are right, Mother," Clara agreed, pouring herself a glass of water with a look of disgust. "Ivy has always been incompetent. She probably did this on purpose out of jealousy. She knew we were coming to meet the big bosses, and she wanted to sabotage us because she is stuck at home with her microwave dinner." "She is bad luck," Beatrice muttered, taking a sip of the water and grimacing. "Ever since Arthur married that girl, a dark cloud has hung over this family. Her energy is poverty. It clings to us. Today was supposed to be perfect, and now look, we are sitting by the kitchen because of her negative aura." "Don't worry," Arthur said, patting Bella's hand, though his eyes were darting around the room in panic. "As soon as the CEO comes out, I will make eye contact. I will give him the signal. We will be moved to the front in no time." "Who is the CEO anyway?" Bella asked, looking at her reflection in a spoon. "Some recluse," Arthur said vaguely. "Thistledown, I think. Nobody has seen the face, but they say he is a visionary, a man of great intellect. He will recognize fellow visionaries when he sees us." "He better," Clara grumbled, "because if I have to smell roasted chicken steam for another 10 minutes, I am going to scream." The lights in the ballroom began to dim. A hush fell over the crowd of 2,000 people. The chatter died down, replaced by the swelling sound of an orchestral score dramatic, powerful and ominous. I signaled Sterling. "It is time," I said. "Open the door." I stepped out of the car. The cool night air hit my skin, but I didn't feel it. I felt only the adrenaline of the endgame. I walked toward the main entrance, The paparazzi were waiting. They didn't know who I was yet, but they sensed the car, the dress, the aura. Inside the ballroom, the spotlight hit the stage. A giant screen descended, displaying the Ethelgard Systems logo. The voice of the master of ceremonies boomed through the speakers, shaking the water in the pitcher on table 42. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice announced, deep and resonant, "distinguished guests, welcome to a night of revelation." I watched the screen one last time as I walked down the corridor toward the backstage entrance. I saw the Ashfords lean forward, their faces illuminated by the glow of the stage lights. They looked hungry. They looked hopeful. They looked like children waiting for a magician to pull a rabbit out of a hat. They did not know that the magician was holding a knife, and the rabbit was already dead. Beatrice adjusted her necklace. "Here we go," she whispered. "Our new life begins now." I closed the tablet. "Yes, Beatrice," I said to myself as the backstage crew opened the heavy curtains for me. "It certainly does." The hallway ahead was dark, leading to the bright, blinding light of the stage. I took a breath, filling my lungs with the scent of lilies and revenge. I checked the clasp of my $55 million necklace. I smoothed the gold fabric of my gown. I was no longer watching the show. I was at the show, and the curtain was about to rise on their destruction. The darkness in the grand ballroom was not merely an absence of light. It was a physical weight, heavy with the collective anticipation of 2,000 of the world's most powerful individuals. The orchestral music that had been swelling in the background cut out abruptly, replaced by a single, resonant drumbeat that echoed through the cavernous space like a heartbeat. I stood behind the massive double doors of the main entrance, listening. I could feel the vibration of the sound system in the floorboards beneath my heels. My heart should have been racing. My palms should have been sweating. But I felt nothing but a glacial calm. I was a missile sitting in the silo, waiting for the launch key to turn. Inside the room, at table 42, tucked away in the shadows of a decorative pillar and smelling faintly of the kitchen's dishwater, the Ashford family was currently leaning forward in their rickety banquet chairs. I knew this because the audio feed from the directional microphone near their table was still playing softly in the earpiece hidden beneath my hair. "This is it," I heard Beatrice hiss, her voice trembling with a mixture of greed and nerves. "Fix your tie. Arthur, sit up straight. When they announce the name, we need to be ready to stand and wave. We need to make sure the CEO sees us immediately." "I am ready, Mother," Arthur whispered back. "Do I look confident? I feel like I am sweating through this shirt." "You look like a partner," Beatrice lied. "Just remember, smile. We are the honorary guests." On the stage, the master of ceremonies, a legendary news anchor whose voice was trusted by millions, stepped up to the podium. A single spotlight hit him, carving him out of the darkness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming through the surround sound system, "we have arrived at the pinnacle of our evening. We have gathered here to celebrate innovation, resilience, and the sheer force of will that drives the global economy. But tonight, we are not just honoring a company, we are honoring a ghost." A murmur of intrigue rippled through the crowd. At table 42, Clara gasped. "A ghost," she whispered. "That sounds mysterious. Maybe the CEO is dead and left the money to us." "Shh," Arthur snapped. "Listen. For 5 years," the MC continued, "Ethelgard Systems has been the silent engine behind the world's logistics, biotechnology, and infrastructure. It has grown from a garage project into a $400 billion empire. Its leader has remained in the shadows, letting the work speak for itself. But tonight, that silence ends. Tonight, the architect steps into the light." The screen behind him exploded into a montage of graphics maps of global shipping routes, complex chemical structures, 3D renderings of futuristic cities, the Ethelgard logo, the shield and spear, pulsed in gold. "Please rise," the MC commanded. "For the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement and Business Leadership Excellence Award, the founder, the CEO, the chairwoman. Chairwoman, Arthur's voice cracked in my ear. Is it a woman? Even better, Beatrice said rapidly. Women love me. I can charm a woman. Get ready. Please welcome, the MC shouted, his voice reaching a crescendo. Mrs. Ivy Thistledown. The name hung in the air for a fraction of a second, unprocessed by the brains of the Ashford family. Then, the double doors in front of me swung open, a spotlight, blinded and white-hot, hit me instantly. I did not blink. I stepped forward onto the plush runner of the center aisle. The reaction at table 42 was delayed by confusion. Ivy Thistledown, Clara repeated, the name sounding foreign on her tongue. That sounds like, wait, that is Ivy's name. Don't be ridiculous, Beatrice scoffed, though her voice wavered. It is a common name. Thistledown as well. It is not that common, but... And then, they saw me. I walked with a slow, deliberate cadence. 1 step, 2 steps. The gold gown flowed around me like liquid metal, catching the spotlight and scattering it in 1,000 directions. The $55 million necklace at my throat blazed with a fire that could be seen from the cheap seats. I was 50 feet away from them, but I was facing forward, my eyes fixed on the stage. However, I knew exactly where they were. I could feel their gaze like a laser burning into the side of my face. Arthur was the first to break. I heard the sound of his chair scraping violently against the floor as he half stood, his legs refusing to support the weight of his realization. Mother, he choked out. Mother, look. Beatrice squinted, leaning past the pillar. I see her. Arthur, I see, oh my God. It is Ivy, Clara shrieked. The sound was so sharp it cut through the applause of the crowd nearby. In her shock, her hands spasmed. The glass of tap water she had been holding slipped from her fingers. It hit the table, shattering, soaking the tablecloth and splashing onto her crimson Valentino dress. She didn't even notice the cold water. Her mouth was hanging open, a perfect O of stupidity. It cannot be, Beatrice whispered, her world fracturing. What is she doing here? Why is she wearing that? She must be working, Arthur stammered, his brain frantically trying to rebuild the reality that had just collapsed. Yes, that is it. She is a model for the event, or a hostess. Look at the dress. It is a costume. She is part of the show. A hostess, Clara said, her voice rising in hysteria. She is wearing the seraphim necklace I saw that in a magazine. It is worth more than our entire bloodline. Fake, Beatrice hissed, clutching her pearls. It is glass, costume jewelry. She is playing a role. She is probably going to hand the trophy to the real CEO. Oh, that treacherous little snake. She didn't tell us she got a gig here so she could spy on us. I continued my walk. I was approaching the VIP sector now. The air changed here. It smelled of expensive cologne and power. This was the moment of truth. If I was just a hostess, the people in these seats would ignore me. They would look through me. But they didn't. As I passed table 3, the CEO of the world's largest search engine stood up. He didn't just stand. He turned to me and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect. Congratulations, Ivy, he said, his voice audible over the applause. I nodded to him. Thank you, David. At table 42, the color drained from Arthur's face. David, that was David. He knows her name. I kept walking. I reached the front row. This was the inner sanctum. The top 10 wealthiest individuals on the planet sat here. A man known for his electric cars and space rockets. A figure Arthur worshipped and quoted daily on his social media stood up. He stepped into the aisle to intercept me. The Ashfords went silent. Absolute, terrified silence. The tech titan extended his hand. Ivy, he said warmly, grasping my hand in both of his. About time you came out of the cave. The logistics algorithm you sent over last week, revolutionary. We are ready to sign whenever you are. I will have the papers ready Monday morning, I replied, my voice calm and authoritative. Clara let out a sound that was half whimper, half squeak. Why, she stammered, clutching her water-stained dress. Why is he shaking her hand? She is a secretary. She makes eggs. She irons my clothes. He thinks she is someone else, Beatrice said. But the conviction was gone. Her voice was a dry husk. He made a mistake. It is a case of mistaken identity. They are all standing up. Mother, Arthur yelled, forgetting to whisper. Look, the senator, the duchess, the oil baron. They are all standing up for her. And they were. The entire front row had risen to their feet. It was a standing ovation. Not for a performance, but for a peer. I walked through the tunnel of applause, the gold of my dress reflecting in their eyes. I reached the stairs to the stage. But before I ascended, I stopped. This was the part of the script I had written just for myself. I turned slowly. I didn't look at the camera. I didn't look at the adoring crowd. I looked past the diamonds, past the tuxedos, past the centerpieces of orchids. I looked into the shadows, into the darkness near the kitchen doors. Behind the pillar, I locked eyes with Arthur, even across the vast distance of the ballroom. The connection was instant. He was frozen, half standing, his hands gripping the edge of the wet tablecloth. His face was a portrait of total devastation. It was the face of a man who looks at a winning lottery ticket and realizes he used it to start a fire. Beside him, Bella, the mistress with the cheap platinum hair, was looking back and forth between me and Arthur, her expression shifting from boredom to dawning horror. Beatrice had collapsed back into her chair, fanning herself with a napkin, her mouth moving in silent prayer or curses. I let the moment hang. I wanted him to see me, really see me, not the woman in the gray cardigan, not the woman who nodded silently when he told her she wasn't smart enough to understand business. I wanted him to see the queen. I raised my chin slightly, and then I smirked. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of acknowledgement. It said, I see you. I see your cheap suit. I see your mistress. I see your terror. And I am enjoying every second of it. Arthur flinched physically, as if I had slapped him. He slumped back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. It is over, I heard him whisper through my earpiece. Oh my God, it is all over. I turned back to the stage. The applause roared in my ears, sounding like the crashing of waves against a cliff. I took the first step up the stairs. My heels clicked on the surface, a rhythmic countdown to their final judgment. The mask was gone. The secretary was dead, and Mrs. Thistledown had arrived to claim her throne. The distance between the parquet floor of the ballroom and the raised platform of the stage was only 5 vertical feet. But as I ascended those stairs, I was crossing a canyon that separated 2 distinct universes. With every step, the air grew thinner, cleaner, stripping away the residue of the suburban kitchen, the smell of burnt toast, and the suffocating weight of Arthur's disappointment. I reached the podium. It was a monolith of transparent acrylic, etched with the Ethelgard crest. I placed my hands on either side of it. The microphone waited, a silver serpent poised to amplify my truth to the world. The master of ceremonies, standing to my right, leaned into his own microphone, his voice dropping to a register of solemn reverence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the architect of the new logistic era, the woman who took a single algorithm and built a fortress of industry, the chairwoman and chief executive officer of Ethelgard Systems, Mrs. Ivy Thistledown. The title hung in the air, echoing off the gilded ceiling. Chief executive officer, through the high-definition audio feed still humming in my hidden earpiece. I heard the sound of a physical collapse at table 42. It was a sharp, plastic clatter, the unmistakable sound of a smartphone slipping from sweaty fingers and hitting a hard floor. No, Arthur's voice came through. A strangled gasp that sounded like a man drowning in shallow water. That is not that it cannot be. I looked out into the darkness. The stage lights were blinding, creating a wall of white between me and the audience, but the giant monitors flanking the stage offered me a crystal-clear view of the crowd. The camera operators, instructed to capture candid reactions, had mercilessly zoomed in on the overflow section. There, on a screen 50 feet high, was the Ashford family. Arthur was bent over, his hand grasping at the air as if trying to catch his falling reality. His face was a study in cognitive dissonance. He was looking at me, then at the screen, then back at me, his brain unable to reconcile the image of his submissive wife with the titan standing before him. Beside him, Beatrice sat frozen. The blood had drained from her face so completely that her skin looked like old parchment. Her mouth was slightly open, her lips trembling, but no sound came out. She looked like a statue that had just realized it was made of sand and the tide was coming in. Behind me, the massive LED wall shifted, the static logo dissolved, replaced by a cinematic reel of my last 5 years. The video began with a drone shot of the Ethelgard headquarters in Seattle. A sprawling campus of glass and steel. Then, it cut to footage of me, not the Ivy who wore gray cardigans, but the Ivy who wore tailored Armani suits. The audience watched in rapt silence as the on-screen Ivy commanded a boardroom of Japanese investors, pointing decisively at a holographic map of the Pacific Rim trade routes. They saw me signing a treaty with the Minister of Trade in Singapore. They saw the cover of Forbes magazine, the issue titled The Silent Billionaire, where my face had been artistically shadowed, but was now undeniably recognizable. "That is her," I heard Clara whisper from table 42. Her voice was high and thin, bordering on hysteria. "That is the blazer I made fun of. I told her it looked like a funeral suit. She wore it to sign a billion-dollar merger." "It is a deep fake," Arthur muttered, his voice shaking. "It is AI. It has to be. Ivy does not know how to negotiate. She asked me for help balancing the checkbook. She cries when the soufflé collapses. This is a trick." I leaned forward, bringing my mouth close to the microphone. The room fell into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "Thank you," I said. My voice was not the soft, apologetic whisper I used when asking Arthur if he wanted tea. It was a contralto, rich and resonant, projected with the diaphragm control of a woman who had shouted down union leaders and silenced hostile shareholders. It was a voice of absolute command. "5 years ago," I began, my eyes scanning the front row where the billionaires sat rapt with attention. "I made a choice. I chose to build Ethelgard in the shadows. I chose anonymity. Many people asked me why." I paused, letting the question linger. "I did it because, in this world, value is often determined by the label on the package, not the contents inside. We live in a society obsessed with the superficial. We judge the book not just by its cover, but by the shelf it sits on." I looked directly at the camera that I knew was broadcasting my face to the giant screen above Arthur's head. I wanted to know who would value the work without the fame. I wanted to see who would respect the mind without the title. And in my personal life, I wanted to know who would love a woman without the checkbook. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. This was not a standard corporate acceptance speech. This was a confession. "I learned a painful lesson," I continued, my voice hardening like cooling steel. "I learned that for some, a person is only as valuable as what they can extract from them. I learned that there are those who will look at a diamond and call it glass because they lack the sophistication to recognize brilliance. They will look at a partner and see a servant. They will look at a CEO and see a lowly secretary." The phrase landed like a physical blow. "Lowly secretary," on the monitor. I saw Arthur flinch. He recognized the words. He had said them to me only 48 hours ago. He had screamed at them in our kitchen while stealing my money. "But the beauty of business," I said, a cold smile touching my lips, "is that the market always corrects itself. The truth has a way of rising to the top, and tonight, the audit is complete, the liabilities have been exposed, and the assets are finally being claimed." The audience erupted. They didn't know the specific details, but they understood the narrative. They loved the story of the underdog, the hidden genius. They stood up, cheering, clapping until their hands hurt. But at table 42, there was no cheering. Clara was shaking her head frantically, gripping the edge of the wet table. "No, no, no. It is a coincidence. It is a twin." "Arthur, does she have a twin?" A secret twin sister who is a genius? She was an only child, Arthur whispered, his eyes wide and hollow. I checked her background. I thought I checked. It is a prank, Clara hissed, her voice rising loud enough to be heard by the tables nearby. It is a reality TV show. Someone tell them to stop. That is my sister-in-law. She is a nobody. People at the adjacent tables turned to look. These were not random guests. At table 41 sat the board of directors for a major European bank. At table 43 sat the partners of a prestigious Manhattan law firm. A woman at the bank's table, a sharp-eyed executive in pearls, leaned over to her colleague. She didn't whisper softly enough. Is that the Ashford family? She asked. The ones shouting, Yes, the colleague replied, adjusting his glasses. I recognize the son, Arthur Ashford. I heard he brought his mistress here tonight. Look, the blonde girl next to him. That is definitely not his wife. Disgusting, the woman sneered. And wait, did she just say the CEO is her sister-in-law? The one they treat like a maid? I read a blind item about them on page 6. Rumor has it they make her clean their rental properties. And now she is their boss. The man chuckled darkly. Karma is not just a concept tonight. Clarice, it is a spectator sport. The whispers spread like wildfire. Fingers were pointed, eyes narrowed. The social insulation that the Ashfords had relied on the politeness of the elite evaporated. They were no longer guests. They were pariahs. I watched it all from my vantage point. I saw Bella, the mistress, pull her arm away from Arthur as she noticed the hostile glares from the surrounding tables. She shrank in her seat, trying to cover the cheap cut of her dress with her napkin. Arthur looked up at the screen again. The camera had zoomed in on my face. There was no denying it. The scar on my left eyebrow, a tiny white line from a childhood bicycle accident, was visible in high definition. He knew that scar. He had traced it with his finger on our honeymoon, back when he still pretended to care. It is Ivy, he choked out, the realization finally breaking his spine. Oh my God. Mother, we borrowed $12 million from her company. We owe her everything. Beatrice let out a low moan, clutching her chest. She owns the debt. Ivy owns the debt. She owns the house, Arthur whispered, tears of terror welling in his eyes. She owns the cars. She owns the very chairs we are sitting on, and we laughed at her invitation. I wrapped up my speech. I didn't need to say more. The sword had been driven home. Now. I just had to twist it. I accept this award, I said, my voice soaring over the crowd. Not just for myself, but for every quiet professional who has been underestimated, for every woman who has been told to stay in her lane. To them, I say buy the road, then you can drive wherever you want. I lifted the heavy crystal trophy above my head. It caught the light, refracting it into 1,000 rainbows. The applause was deafening, but through the noise, through the adoration, the only sound that mattered to me was the silence from table 42. It was the silence of a family watching their future dissolve into ash. I lowered the trophy and stepped back from the podium. As I turned to leave the stage, I glanced one last time at the monitor. Arthur was sitting with his head in his hands. Beatrice was weeping openly, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets. Clara was arguing with a waiter who was trying to get her to lower her voice. They were exactly where they belonged in the dark, in the back, drowning in the mess they had created. And I was walking into the light. The applause had finally died down, replaced by the sophisticated hum of 1,000 conversations buzzing at once. The ballroom had transformed. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts through the crowd, replacing the dinner service with trays of vintage champagne and artisanal hors d'oeuvres. The air smelled of expensive perfume, lilies, and the distinct, metallic scent of power. I stood near the center of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water that I had no intention of drinking. I was the sun, and the rest of the room had become planets orbiting my gravity. Every CEO, every politician, every titan of industry who had ignored me or looked through me for the past decade was now vying for 3 seconds of eye contact. Remarkable speech, Mrs. Thistledown, Senator Sterling said, leaning in close. He was a man who controlled half the infrastructure budget of the East Coast. The way you framed the logistics crisis as a failure of imagination rather than resources brilliant. I would love to discuss your thoughts on the new Port Authority regulations. I have some strong opinions on that, Senator, I replied, my voice smooth and practiced. The current regulations are stifling innovation. Ethelgard has a proposal that could increase efficiency by 30% without compromising safety. 30%. The senator's eyes widened. That is well. That is music to my ears. We must schedule lunch. My assistant will be in touch, I said, suppressing a smile. The irony of me. The lowly secretary, now having an assistant to manage a U.S. senator, was delicious. But before the senator could respond, the orbit of my solar system was violently disturbed. A ripple of awkward silence began at the edge of the circle and spread inward. People were stepping aside, not out of respect, but out of the kind of discomfort one feels when witnessing a public accident. I turned my head slightly. Plowing through the crowd of dignitaries was the Ashford family. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck who had washed up at a royal wedding. Beatrice was leading the charge, her emerald velvet dress rumpled from sitting. Her face plastered with a smile so wide and rigid it looked painful. Behind her, Arthur was practically dragging his feet, his face pale and slick with sweat, his tuxedo tie askew. Clara trailed them, still dabbing at the water stain on her dress, looking like a cornered animal, and trailing furthest behind. Looking like she wished she could teleport away, was Bella, the mistress. They were fueled by a potent cocktail of terror and audacity. They knew they were drowning, and they had decided that their only life vest was to publicly claim me as their own. If they could hug me, if they could act like this was all a big family secret we shared, maybe the bank wouldn't take the house. Maybe the creditors would back off. Beatrice reached the inner circle. She elbowed past the CEO of a major airline, who spilled a drop of wine on his cuff and looked at her with open disdain. She didn't notice. Her eyes were locked on me. "Ivy," she cried out. Her voice was an octave too high, shattering the polite atmosphere of the cocktail hour. "Oh, my darling girl, there you are." The senator stopped talking. He looked at Beatrice, then at me, one eyebrow raised. "Friend of yours, Mrs. Thistledown." I did not answer him immediately. I turned my full body toward them. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply looked at them with the impassive, terrifying neutrality of a security camera. Beatrice lunged forward, her arms open for a hug. "Oh, you naughty thing, you hid this from us so well. I am just bursting with pride. Imagine. My own daughter-in-law, the CEO of Ethelgard. I told Arthur, didn't I? Arthur, I said there was something special about our Ivy." She was 3 feet away when I held up a single hand. It was a small gesture, but it hit her like a physical wall. She stopped dead, her arms still half raised, looking ridiculous. The silence in the immediate vicinity deepened. The circle of onlookers grew tighter. Humans are social predators. They smell blood, and they want to see the kill. "Mrs. Ashford," I said. My voice was not loud, but it projected perfectly, cutting through the ambient noise. "You seem confused." "Confused?" Beatrice laughed. A nervous, trilling sound that grated on the nerves. "Oh, stop teasing. Darling, we are family. We are here to celebrate you. We are so proud. We were just saying how—" I cut her off. "I recall receiving a voice message from you 2 days ago." Beatrice's smile faltered. Her eyes darted to the senator, then back to me. "I do not know what you mean." "I can play it for you if you like," I said, pulling my phone from my clutch. "But my memory is quite excellent. You said, and I quote, 'We are busy meeting important partners tonight. No one has time to watch you receive a certificate for fast typing.'" A gasp went through the crowd. The senator actually choked on his drink. "Fast typing," someone whispered loudly behind me. She told the CEO of Ethelgard she was a typist. Beatrice's face turned the color of ash. She tried to backtrack, her hands fluttering uselessly. Honestly, Ivy, that was just a joke. A family inside joke. You know how we tease each other. We knew you were doing something big. We just didn't want to spoil the surprise. And you, Arthur? I shifted my gaze to my husband. He flinched, as if I had pointed a gun at him. He stepped forward, trying to summon the arrogance that usually fueled him, but the tank was empty. He looked small. He looked cheap. Ivy, honey, he started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. Ivy, look, this is a lot. We are all a bit emotional. Obviously, there has been a miscommunication, but we are husband and wife. We are a team. He tried to step closer, reaching for my hand. Let's not do this here. Let's not make a scene in front of these people. They do not need to know our private business. Let's go home. We can open a bottle of wine. Just you and me. And talk about this like adults. I let him finish. I let the hope bloom in his eyes for a split second. Go home, I repeated, tilting my head slightly. Yes, Arthur said. Eager now. Home. Our home. Which home are you referring to? Arthur, I asked. My tone was genuinely curious, which made it all the more cruel. Are you talking about the estate on Oak Creek Drive? Yes, of course, Arthur said, confusion clouding his face. Where else? I took a sip of my water, savoring the moment. That is strange, because according to the notification I received from the foreclosure department of the National Bank, which, incidentally, is a subsidiary of a company I acquired this morning, that property is scheduled to be sealed by federal marshals at 8 a.m. tomorrow. The reaction was instantaneous. A collective, ooh, rippled through the room. It wasn't polite shock. It was the scandalous thrill of a public execution. Arthur froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. Sealed, what are you talking about? You missed 3 mortgage payments, Arthur, I said, listing the facts with the cold precision of an auditor. And then you took out a second lien against the equity to pay for your mother's country club dues. And then a third line to lease that limousine sitting outside. The bank has called the loan. You are insolvent. That is a lie, Beatrice shrieked, forgetting her proud mother act entirely. We have assets. We are standing. How dare you discuss our finances in public? I am not discussing your finances, I replied calmly. I am discussing my assets, because as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I purchased your debt. I am your creditor, Beatrice, and I am calling it in. Beatrice clutched Clara for support. Clara looked like she was going to be sick right on the expensive carpet. Did you buy our debt? Arthur whispered. The horror in his eyes was absolute. He realized now that this wasn't just a bad night. This was an extinction event. I did, I said. Every cent of it, including the credit card you used yesterday. I turned my gaze slightly to the left, focusing on the blonde woman trying to hide behind Arthur's shoulder. And speaking of expenses, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost friendly tone. You have brought a guest. How rude of me not to introduce myself. I took a step toward Bella. She shrank back, bumping into a waiter who had to balance his tray precariously. Introduce us. Arthur, I commanded. Arthur couldn't speak. He was shaking his head, pleading with his eyes. Don't do this. Please don't do this. No, I asked. Fine, I will do it. I gestured to Bella with my glass, addressing the crowd of billionaires and politicians surrounding us. Everyone, I would like you to address the reason my husband claimed we could not afford to fix the leak in our roof, I announced. This is Bella. I believe the receipt from yesterday listed her as the recipient of a $5,000 diamond bracelet, purchased, I might add, with the emergency savings I put away from my secretary's salary. I looked at Bella. Tell me, my dear, is the bracelet heavy? It cost exactly the price of the structural repairs needed to keep water from dripping into the guest bedroom. I hope it keeps you warm. Bella turned a bright, violent shade of crimson. She looked at Arthur, then at me. then at the hundreds of eyes judging her. She didn't say a word. She simply burst into tears, turned around, and ran. She pushed through the crowd, her heels clacking unevenly, fleeing the scene of the crime. "Bella, wait," Arthur called out instinctively, then stopped. Realizing the absurdity of chasing his mistress in front of his billionaire wife, he turned back to me, his face a mask of total defeat. "Ivy, why are you doing this?" "Why?" I asked. I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space. For the first time all night, I let a flicker of real emotion show on my face. It wasn't anger, it was disgust. "Because for 5 years, I made myself small so you could feel big," I said, my voice low and lethal. "I cooked your meals, I washed your clothes, I listened to you belittle me, mock my career, and treat me like an accessory that embarrassed you. And tonight you brought your mistress to watch me fail. You wanted to sit in the back and laugh at the lowly secretary." I leaned in so close I could smell the fear on him. "Well, nobody is laughing now." I straightened up and turned back to the senator, who was watching the scene with a mixture of shock and admiration. "My apologies, Senator," I said, my voice instantly returning to professional composure. "Family matters can be so messy. Now, about that Port Authority proposal. Shall we find a quieter table?" "Absolutely," the senator said, offering me his arm. "Lead the way, Mrs. Thistledown." I walked away. I did not look back. Behind me, the sound of the Ashford family imploding was drowned out by the renewed hum of conversation, as the sharks of New York society turned their backs on the bleeding prey and returned their attention to the Queen. "Sarah," I said. The single word was a command, crisp and devoid of hesitation. It cut through the lingering murmur of the crowd like a knife through silk. My executive assistant, who had been waiting in the wings like a shadow, materialized instantly at my side. She held a thick, leather-bound dossier in her hands. It was black, unadorned, and terrifyingly heavy with the weight of facts. Sarah did not look at the Ashfords. She did not acknowledge the sobbing mistress who had just fled, nor the trembling matriarch clutching her pearls. She handed me the dossier with the precision of a surgeon passing a scalpel. "The financial autopsy is complete, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice projecting just enough for the surrounding circle of billionaires and industry titans to hear. "The liabilities exceed the assets by a ratio of 3-to-1. I took the file. The leather felt cool under my fingers. I turned back to the Ashford family, who were now huddled together like cattle sensing the approach of a storm. "You mentioned earlier, Beatrice," I began, opening the file and scanning the first page with deliberate slowness, "that you were here to meet important partners. I believe you were courting the investment group from Dubai, and perhaps the venture capital firm from Silicon Valley seated at table 12. I looked up. The representatives from those very groups were standing nearby, their drinks in hand, watching the spectacle with rapt attention. They were sharks, and they knew the smell of blood in the water. "I think I can save everyone some valuable time," I said, my voice shifting into the cold, analytical cadence I use during hostile takeovers. "There is no partnership to be had here. There is only a salvage operation." "Ivy, stop," Arthur pleaded, his voice a wet, ragged whisper. "Please, not here, not in front of them." I ignored him. I pulled a document from the folder and held it up. The paper rustled in the silence of the ballroom. "This," I announced, addressing the room at large, "is a promissory note issued by the Ashford Group 90 days ago. It was a bridge loan intended to cover operating costs. It was secured against the deed to the commercial complex in Midtown." I let the paper drop to the floor. It fluttered down and landed near Beatrice's velvet shoe. "And this," I pulled out a second sheet, "is a notice of default on that loan. The interest payments were missed 3 months in a row." Another paper drifted to the floor. "And finally," I withdrew a thick stack of stapled pages. "This is the purchase agreement signed at 4:30 this afternoon. Ethelgard Systems, through its distressed asset division, has acquired the entirety of the Ashford Group's debt obligations from their primary lenders. I looked directly at Beatrice. The color had not just drained from her face, it seemed to have been sucked out by a vacuum. She looked like a corpse that had been propped up and painted. "Do you understand what that means?" "Beatrice," I asked, my tone conversational, as if I were explaining a simple arithmetic problem to a slow child. "It means the partners you are looking for are not in Dubai. They are not in Silicon Valley. There is only one partner. There is only one creditor. There is only one entity standing between you and absolute ruin." I closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Me!" The realization hit them like a physical blow. The knees of the Ashford matriarch, which had held her upright through decades of social climbing and pretense, finally gave way. Beatrice collapsed. It was not a graceful swoon. It was a heavy, clumsy crumbling of a woman who had lost her foundation. She fell to the carpet, her emerald dress billowing around her like a deflated parachute. She reached out, her manicured hands grasping at the hem of my golden gown. "Ivy," she wailed, the sound piercing and pathetic. "Ivy, please, we are family. You cannot do this. You are one of us. We share a name." I looked down at her. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I felt only the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. "Family." I repeated the word, tasting it. It tasted like ash. That is a curious classification. "Beatrice, in business, we define relationships by the exchange of value. What value have you provided for 5 years? You have consumed my labor, my patience, and my finances. You have treated me as a liability, not an asset." "We were wrong," Beatrice sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining the expensive makeup I had paid for. "We were fools, but we can change. We can be better. You are the daughter I never had. Please, Ivy, do not destroy us. Think of the family honor." "Honor is a currency you spent a long time ago," I replied coldly. "And as for our relationship, you were quite clear about my role. You called me a lowly secretary. You mocked my ability to contribute anything beyond domestic servitude." I signaled to the crowd, my hand sweeping across the room. "You told me I was only good for filing papers and taking notes. So, I decided to embrace that role. I have spent the last 6 months doing exactly what a good secretary does. I have been taking notes. I have been filing records. I have been documenting every single instance of embezzlement, fraud, and financial negligence committed by this family." I looked down at the woman clawing at my dress. "I am just doing my job. Beatrice, I am recording your failure." The cruelty of the logic was absolute. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and Beatrice's jagged breathing. Then, the explosion happened. Clara, who had been standing frozen in shock, suddenly snapped. The humiliation, the public exposure, the destruction of her fantasy life. It was too much for her fragile ego to process. She let out a primal scream, a sound of pure, animalistic rage. "You witch!" Clara shrieked. "You ruined everything you planned this, you jealous, vindictive little rat." She lunged at me. Her hands were clawed, her nails aimed at my face, desperate to tear away the beauty and power she could never possess. She covered less than 2 feet of distance. My security detail did not move with panic. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of a machine. 2 men in black suits, who had been blending into the crowd, materialized between me and Clara. One of them caught her wrist in midair. The other gripped her shoulder. There was no struggle. It was physics. Force meets leverage. They spun her around and pinned her arms behind her back in a single, fluid motion. Clara screamed again, thrashing against them, kicking her legs, her crimson dress bunching up around her thighs. "Get off me!" she yelled, spitting saliva. "Do you know who I am? I am an Ashford." "Remove her," I said. I did not even take a step back. I did not flinch. "She is disturbing the guests." The guards dragged her backward. Her heels skidded across the marble floor of the entryway, leaving black scuff marks. She looked less like a socialite and more like a bag of refuse being hauled to the curb. Her screams faded as they pushed her through the double doors, ejecting her from the world she so desperately wanted to belong to. I turned my attention to the last man standing, Arthur. He was shaking so violently that his teeth were audible, clicking together in a rhythm of pure fear. He looked at the doors where his sister had just vanished. He looked at his mother sobbing on the floor, and then he looked at me. And in that moment, the final layer of his character was stripped away, revealing the rot at the core. "It was not me," Arthur blurted out. The words hung in the air, sickeningly sweet with cowardice. "What did you say?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "It was them." Arthur pointed a trembling finger at his mother, who was still kneeling at my feet. "It was Mother and Clara. They made me do it. Ivy, you know how they are. They are demanding. They spend money we do not have. I tried to stop them. I told them we should not take the loans. I told them we should treat you better." Beatrice stopped crying. She looked up at her son, her eyes widening in betrayal. "Arthur, it is true," Arthur continued, his voice rising in a desperate pitch. "I defended you. Ivy, I always told them you were smart, but Mother threatened to cut me off. She forced me to sign those papers. I am a victim here. I am your husband. I am on your side." A collective gasp of disgust rippled through the room. The titans of industry, the politicians, the billionaires, they had seen corporate raiders, they had seen ruthless negotiations, but they had rarely seen a man throw his own mother to the wolves to save his own skin. I watched him with a look of profound revulsion. This was the man I had loved. This spineless creature who would sell his own blood for a life raft. "You are pathetic, Arthur," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. "Ivy, please," he whimpered, reaching out a hand. "We can fix this. I can help you run the company. I know the Ashford business inside and out. I can be your partner, a real partner this time." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "Partner." I shook my head. "Arthur, you do not seem to understand the nature of an acquisition. When a company acquires a failing asset, the first step is restructuring. We strip away the inefficiencies. We remove the dead weight." I signaled to Sarah again. She handed me a single sheet of paper. "This is a formal notice of termination," I said, holding it out to him. "Termination." Arthur blinked. "But I am the vice president of the Ashford Group." "The Ashford Group no longer exists as an independent entity," I corrected him. "It is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Ethelgard Systems, and as the chairwoman of the parent company, I have reviewed the organizational chart. Your position is redundant. It is a title with no function, much like yourself." "Are you firing me?" Arthur stammered. "From my own family company." "I am firing you from my company," I said. "Effective immediately, your access to the corporate accounts has been revoked. Your company car has been repossessed, the keys are with the valet, and your security clearance has been deactivated." "But what will I do?" Arthur asked, his voice shrinking to that of a child. "I have no money. I have nowhere to go." "I believe there are several temp agencies in the city that are hiring," I said, my face impassive. "I hear they are looking for people with administrative skills. Perhaps you can find a position as a secretary. I am told it is honest work." The burn was absolute. The circle of onlookers exchanged glances, some smirking, some nodding in approval of the savage justice being dispensed. Arthur stood there, stripped of his dignity, his money, his family, and his pride. He looked at the paper in my hand, but he did not take it. He simply crumpled. "Security!" I called out. The two guards returned, having disposed of Clara. They stepped up behind Arthur and Beatrice. "Escort Mr. and Mrs. Ashford off the premises," I ordered. "They are trespassing on a private corporate event." Beatrice let out a low wail as the guard helped her to her feet. She was too weak to struggle. She leaned heavily on the man, her head hanging low, her emerald velvet dress stained with dust from the floor. Arthur did not fight. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and regret, but I did not look back. I had already turned my attention to the dossier in my hand. "And make sure they use the service exit," I added, without looking up. "The one by the kitchen. I would not want them to clutter the main lobby." The guards took them by the arms. There was no dignity in their departure. They were marched through the crowd, past the tables of champagne and caviar, past the people they had tried so hard to impress. The crowd parted for them, not out of respect, but to avoid contamination. I watched them go until the kitchen doors swung shut behind them, cutting off the view of their slumped shoulders. The room remained silent for a heartbeat longer. Then, slowly, the conversations resumed, but the tone had changed. The air was charged with a new energy. They had witnessed a slaughter. Clean and precise. I handed the dossier back to Sarah. "File this," I said. "Close the Ashford account. It is finished." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, a hint of awe in her voice. "And the dissolution paperwork." "Have it on my desk by Monday morning," I replied. "We will liquidate the assets and donate the proceeds to the charity fund." I turned back to the room, smoothing the gold fabric of my dress. My heart was beating steadily, calm and strong. The debt had been collected. The books were balanced. I caught the eye of the senator again. He raised his glass to me in a silent toast. I nodded in return. Business concluded. Now, I can finally enjoy the party. The heavy brass-lined double doors of the service entrance swung shut with a finality that resonated in my bones. The screaming, which had been a jagged, piercing soundtrack to the last 5 minutes, was cut off instantly, replaced by the muffled thud of the latch engaging. The Ashford family, my husband, his mother, his sister, was gone. They had been excised from the room like a tumor removed by a steady hand, leaving the body of the gala healthy, vibrant, and cleansed. For a span of 3 seconds, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was suspended in a vacuum of absolute silence. 2,000 of the world's most influential people sat frozen, processing the brutality and the elegance of what they had just witnessed. They had seen hostile takeovers before. They had seen corporate raids and public scandals, but they had never seen a domestic dismantling executed with such lethal precision on a global stage. Then, it began. It started with a single clap from the front row, the tech titan who had shaken my hand earlier. Then the senator joined in. Then the banking executives. Within moments, the silence was shattered by a thunderous, rolling roar of applause. It was not polite applause. It was the primal, adrenaline-fueled cheering of a Colosseum crowd that had just watched the gladiator strike the killing blow. They were not just applauding Ivy Thistledown, the CEO. They were applauding the justice of it. They were applauding the sheer, undeniable power of the act. I did not smile. I did not wave. I stood in the center of the room, the golden fabric of my gown pooling around my feet like liquid treasure, and I absorbed the energy. I let it wash over me, scrubbing away the last lingering residues of the lowly secretary. The woman who had flinched at the sound of Arthur's garage door opening was dead. The woman who had frantically scrubbed wine stains out of Beatrice's carpets was dead. I turned and walked back toward the stage. My movement was fluid, unhurried. The crowd parted for me, their eyes wide with a mixture of reverence and fear. I ascended the stairs to the podium for the second time that night. The master of ceremonies stepped back, giving me the floor. I gripped the sides of the acrylic podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the diamonds sparkling under the lights, at the cameras broadcasting this moment to millions of screens around the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and calm, betraying none of the violence that had just occurred. "I apologize for the disruption. It seems that in the process of acquiring distressed assets, one must occasionally deal with the disposal of waste." Laughter rippled through the room, nervous, shocked, but appreciative. "However," I continued, "business is about clarity. It is about removing the obstacles that obscure value. For 5 years, I allowed an obstacle to stand in my way. I allowed a false narrative to dictate my worth. I believed that if I made myself smaller, others would feel comfortable enough to love me. I paused, letting the words land. I was wrong. Dimming your light does not help the blind to see. It only leaves you stumbling in the dark with them. Tonight, I have turned the lights back on. I looked down at the front row. Let this be a lesson to every partner, every investor, and every competitor in this room. Ethelgard Systems does not tolerate inefficiency. We do not tolerate fraud, and we certainly do not tolerate disrespect. When you bet against us, ensure you have the capital to cover the loss, because I will collect. I stepped back from the microphone. The applause rose again, but I signaled to my team. The show was not over. There was one final piece of administrative business to attend to. I walked down the steps and moved toward the VIP table that had been reserved for me, table 1. It was set with the finest crystal and silver. Sitting there, waiting for me, was a man in a sharp charcoal suit. It was not a guest. It was Mr. Sterling, my personal attorney. Not to be confused with my driver, he stood up as I approached, placing a sleek black folder on the white tablecloth, right next to a chilled bottle of Dom Pérignon. "Is it done?" I asked, sitting down. "Everything is prepared, Mrs. Thistledown," Sterling said, opening the folder. "The papers were drafted this morning. Per your instructions, the grounds are irrefutable: adultery, financial misconduct, and fraud. The seizure of the marital assets is already in motion. The locks on the estate were changed by a remote security team 10 minutes ago." I looked at the document. Petition for dissolution of marriage. It was just paper. It was just ink, but it looked like a declaration of independence. "And the prenuptial agreement?" I asked. "There was no prenuptial agreement," Sterling reminded me. "However, since you purchased the entirety of his debts, you are technically his primary creditor. Any assets he might claim in the divorce will immediately be seized to pay the outstanding loans you now own. He leaves the marriage with exactly what he brought to it: 0. "Perfect," I said. I picked up the heavy silver fountain pen. I did not hesitate. I did not think about the wedding day, or the vows, or the first time he held my hand. Those memories belonged to a different life. I signed my name, Ivy Thistledown, in a bold, sweeping script. The ink was black and permanent. I handed the folder back to Sterling. "File it. I want him served before he wakes up in whatever cheap motel he finds tonight." "Consider it done," Sterling said, snapping the folder shut and vanishing into the crowd. I stood up and signaled for a microphone. The press pit, located at the edge of the stage, was clamoring for a statement. I walked over to them, the flashbulbs erupting like a strobe light storm. "Mrs. Thistledown," a reporter from the Wall Street Journal shouted, "what are your plans for the Ashford Group assets? You mentioned liquidation." I looked into the camera lens. The Ashford Group was a monument to vanity and mismanagement. It produced nothing of value. Therefore, I am dissolving the company effective immediately. The land holdings will be sold. "And the proceeds?" another reporter asked. "That is a portfolio worth nearly $50 million. I am announcing the creation of a new philanthropic venture," I said, my voice ringing out clearly. "The proceeds from the liquidation of the Ashford estate will be used to seed the Phoenix Fund. It will be a grant program dedicated exclusively to supporting women entrepreneurs who are starting their businesses from nothing, women who are working as secretaries, assistants, and cleaners, who have the brilliance to lead but lack the capital to start." I smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. "I think it is poetic. The Ashford fortune, which was used to belittle a working woman, will now be used to build thousands of them." The reporters scribbled furiously. This was the headline of the decade. "One last question," a reporter from a tech magazine shouted. "Mrs. Thistledown," during the altercation, "the Ashford family repeatedly referred to you as a lowly secretary. Can you comment on that?" I paused. This was the twist I had been savoring. "They did," I agreed. "They believed my job was to organize their lives and clean up their messes. They called me a secretary as an insult. But at Ethelgard, We do not insult titles. We innovate them. I leaned in closer to the microphones. For the last 2 years, while I sat in that kitchen, I was not just cooking eggs, I was coding. I was building a new artificial intelligence architecture designed to automate high-level corporate governance. It is a system that analyzes inefficiency, predicts failure, and executes restructuring without human emotion. It replaces the need for incompetent middle management. I looked directly at the camera. The internal code name for that project was the Secretary, because it organizes, it filters, and it controls the flow of information. The Ashfords were right. I am the Secretary, and my project just went live. It is the system that analyzed their company, flagged their insolvency, and authorized the purchase of their debt. They were not taken down by a person. They were made obsolete by the very thing they mocked. The reporters gasped. The Secretary wasn't just a cover story, it was the weapon. I turned away from the press, signaling that the interview was over. I walked back to my table. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by a warm, steady hum of satisfaction. I picked up a glass of champagne. My phone, sitting on the table, buzzed. I looked down at the screen. It was a message from a blocked number, but the preview showed the text, "Ivy, please. I am at a gas station. Mother is fainting. Bella left me. I have no cash. Please, just answer. I love you. We can fix this." I stared at the words. I love you. He had typed those same words to his mistress yesterday. He had said them to me while stealing my savings. The words were hollow. Empty shells. I did not feel a pang of guilt. I did not feel the urge to save him. I tapped the screen once. Block caller. Then I selected the entire message thread, 5 years of lies, gaslighting, and manipulation, and hit delete. The phone went dark. I lifted the crystal flute of champagne. The bubbles rose in a perfect golden chain. I looked around the room. I was alone at the table. I had no husband. I had no in-laws. I had no one to drive me home but my employee. But as I looked at the ceiling of the plaza, painted with cherubs and clouds, I realized I had never been less lonely. I was accompanied by my ambition. I was surrounded by my achievement. I was free. I took a sip of the wine. It was cold, crisp, and tasted like absolute victory. "To the Secretary," I whispered to myself. I turned to face the room one last time. The flashbulbs popping like distant stars. The Ashfords had thought they were the main characters of this story. They thought they were the royalty inviting a peasant to their court. They never realized that I was the author, and they were merely the comic relief in the tragedy of their own making. I had invited them to my award ceremony, and they had graciously provided the entertainment. The curtain had fallen, the applause was fading into the rhythm of the after-party, and I was standing exactly where I belonged at the top of the world, looking down. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Ivy's revenge as much as I enjoyed writing it. Please let me know in the comments section where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear which part of the world our Crimson Drama Stories community is reaching today. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and power, please consider subscribing to Crimson Drama Stories, liking this video, and pressing the hype button to help this story be heard by more people. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more of these dramatic stories to life.